forged by stone. The 2 million-year evolution of hunter-gatherer tools. In the ancient landscapes of Africa, before writing, before farming, before the spark of civilization, there was stone. Not castles or statues, but flakes and fragments. In these primal shards lay the origin of technology. The first tools were not fashioned from ambition, but from necessity. Hunger, danger, opportunity, these drove the hands of our ancestors. Over time, what began as chance strikes on rock became purposeful design. The stone tool became the earliest symbol of human ingenuity. We began our journey over 2.5 million years ago. The earth was wild, unforgiving. Giant carnivores roamed open plains. Forests teemed with life, but also with threats. And in this crucible of survival emerged one of the first hominins to wield technology, Homo habilis, the handyman. The Oldowan dawn, 2.6 million years ago. The earliest tools we found are known today as Oldowan tools, named after Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania where they were first studied. These were not tools in the modern sense, no handles. No symmetry, but flakes struck from cores, sharp-edged and efficient. These flakes were used to scrape hides, butcher meat, and crack open the nutrient-rich marrow of long bones. With Oldowan tools, early humans gained access to resources no other species could reach. A scavenged carcass, discarded by a lion, became a feast once the hide could be pierced and bones split. These tools provided calories to feed a growing brain, a brain that would eventually imagine fire, language, art. Found not only in Tanzania but across Ethiopia, Kenya, and even outside Africa, Oldowan tools represent a fundamental turning point in human evolution. They show planning, foresight, and most critically, the idea of transformation. A rock was no longer just a rock. It could become something more. But the Oldowan toolkit remained fairly unchanged for nearly 1 million years. It was basic but effective. It worked. And then came something more refined, more deliberate. Something that would define the next great chapter in human toolmaking. The rise of the Acheulean, 1.6 million years ago. With the emergence of Homo erectus, we witness a major leap not only in anatomy and mobility, but in technology. This new human ancestor was taller, more intelligent, and more adapted to a range of climates. Homo erectus left Africa and traveled deep into Eurasia, reaching as far as China and Indonesia. With them came the Acheulean hand axe. Unlike the haphazard flakes of Oldowan tools, Acheulean hand axes were carefully shaped. Bifacially flaked stones with a symmetrical teardrop or oval design. They required skill to make. Each stroke had purpose. A master hand axe maker might strike a single stone up to 60 times before achieving the desired edge. These tools were multifunctional for cutting, chopping, scraping, and digging. But they were also beautiful. Some Acheulean hand axes are so finely crafted that archaeologists debate whether they had symbolic value, possibly used for social signaling or mating display. Their symmetry may have conveyed status, skill, or intelligence. Some were never used, suggesting they were ritual or symbolic objects. Found across 3 continents. The Acheulean toolkit marks one of the longest-lasting technologies in human history, lasting over 1 million years. It shows that toolmaking was no longer just functional. It was becoming cognitive, social, and perhaps even spiritual. But as humans spread and evolved, so too did their tools. The Acheulean era would eventually give way to new techniques more complex, more efficient, and more specialized. Shaping the future prepared core technology 300,000 years ago. As the Ice Age descended, the human story split. In Africa, anatomically modern humans were evolving. In Europe and Western Asia, Neanderthals robust and intelligent were flourishing. Both groups used a new kind of toolmaking, prepared core techniques. This method, often called the Liverpool technique, involved preparing a stone core in advance and striking off flakes of predictable shape and size. The technique required planning, visualization, and manual precision. It was no longer about reacting to material, it was about engineering it. These flakes became spear points, scrapers, alls more effective, standardized, and often hafted onto wood or bone handles. For the first time, stone was paired with organic materials to form composite tools. This era also marks the likely emergence of adhesives. Birch pitch, created by heating bark in low-oxygen environments, was used to glue stone to shaft. It was a kind of Stone Age epoxy, and its creation required knowledge of fire control, materials science, and time. Neanderthals, once viewed as brutish, are now recognized as skilled technologists. Their tools show high precision. They may have passed knowledge down generations. In their flakes and blades, we see the continuation and expansion of cognitive skill. And on the African plains, a different lineage, our own, was preparing to break free. The cognitive leap microliths and composite tools, 70,000 to 40,000 years ago. As the Ice Age deepened and Homo sapiens began to flourish, a new era of innovation emerged, one that would push technology from basic survival to specialized mastery. In regions across Africa, Europe, and Asia, early modern humans started crafting microliths, tiny, carefully shaped stone blades, usually just a few centimeters long. While small in size, their impact on human evolution was enormous. Microliths weren't used alone. They were mounted into wood, bone, or antler shafts to create composite tools: harpoons, arrows, barbed spears, and multi-bladed knives. This was a modular system of technology, interchangeable, adaptable, and efficient. A broken blade could be replaced without discarding the entire weapon. Different microliths could be crafted for different prey, terrain, or purposes. This innovation marked a strategic shift. Tools weren't just more advanced, they were designed with foresight and logistics in mind. Hunters could travel with a toolkit of microliths and construct what they needed on site. The bow and arrow emerging during this period revolutionized distance hunting, allowing humans to strike prey from a safe range with accuracy and stealth. These advances also reflect changes in social structure. Creating composite tools required cooperation. Someone gathered the wood, another carved bone tips, another struck microliths, and perhaps another bound them all with sinew or resin. This division of labor, skill sharing, and planning laid the groundwork for more complex societies. Precision through fire, the mastery of hafting and adhesives. The power of microliths was magnified by another leap, the use of binding agents and glues. Early humans discovered how to heat birch bark in low oxygen conditions to produce birch pitch, a sticky, tar-like substance used to glue stone to wood. This was one of the earliest forms of synthetic chemistry. The process wasn't accidental. It required careful control of fire temperature, duration, and airflow. Once hardened, birch pitch formed a strong, waterproof bond. With it, stone and organic materials became one. This breakthrough in hafting, joining two materials into one composite tool, elevated the durability of spears, knives, and axes. Other adhesives were made from pine resin mixed with beeswax or plant fibers. Some tools were bound with animal sinew, rawhide strips, or plant twine. The strength of a weapon now depended not just on its blade, but on its construction as a whole. With these technologies, our ancestors developed a level of craftsmanship that rivaled modern bushcraft. They experimented with materials, refined techniques, and passed this knowledge down through generations, likely through demonstration, ritual, or even early forms of language. Tools of bone, antler, and ivory, the organic revolution. As Ice Age humans adapted to harsher environments, a new chapter began, not carved from stone, but from bone, antler, and ivory. These organic materials opened up possibilities that stone alone could not offer. They were lighter, more flexible, and more resilient, especially in cold, dry climates where survival demanded agility and efficiency. From the frozen plains of Siberia to the wind-lashed coasts of Western Europe, early humans began crafting tools not only to cut, but to sew, to catch, to trap, and to express. Among the most transformative inventions was the sewing needle. Carved from bone or antler, these needles, some complete with drilled eyes, enabled the creation of fitted clothing. This wasn't just about comfort. It was about life and death in Ice Age conditions. Clothes made from multiple animal hides, stitched with sinew, provided mobility, insulation, and even social identity. Fishing hooks, barbed harpoons, and toggle-headed spears appeared as humans expanded their diets beyond land. Bone harpoons allowed the exploitation of lakes, rivers, and coasts. Tools became longer, sharper, and more specialized. Where stone tools left little room for finesse, bone tools introduced delicacy and precision. These tools also tell us something about the cognitive shift underway. Bone and ivory are harder to shape than flint. Their creation required slower, more deliberate carving, often using abrasion, scraping, and polishing over days or weeks. This level of patience and planning suggests long-term thinking and a growing investment in durable, repeat-use technology. Ornament, identity, and the first symbols. Something remarkable begins to appear in the archaeological record around 40,000 years ago. Art. Pendants made from polished bone. Beads carved from ivory. Shells stained with ochre. These weren't tools for hunting or digging, they were expressions of identity, meaning, and possibly belief. Among the most iconic finds are Venus figurines' exaggerated carvings of the female form, found across Europe and Siberia. Some are made from mammoth ivory or fired clay, others from antler. Their meaning remains debated: fertility symbols, clan totems, or spiritual figures, but their purpose is unmistakable. They are symbolic objects. For the first time, humans were embedding stories, beliefs, and personal expression into material things. Tools became more than functional, they became cultural artifacts. Bone flutes like those from the Geisenklostel cave in Germany, dating back over 40,000 years, remind us that tools weren't just for survival. They were for connection. These flutes, some made from vulture wing bones, played music that likely accompanied rituals, dances, or storytelling. In this way, tools helped create shared experience, reinforcing memory, belonging, and heritage. The toolkit expands specialization and trade. By 30,000 years ago, the human toolkit had exploded in complexity. Where once a few flake tools served all needs, now humans had dozens of specialized instruments. Burins for engraving, awls for punching leather, scrapers for hide preparation, perforators for bead making, and bores for drilling shell ornaments. In regions like Sunjir in Russia or Dolny Vostanis in the Czech Republic, grave goods included spears carved from straight mammoth tusks, headdresses of fox teeth, and long necklaces of ivory beads. These weren't made in isolation. They reflect division of labor, craft expertise, and long-distance trade, as raw materials like Baltic amber or Mediterranean shells show up thousands of kilometers from their source. Some archaeologists argue that this growing complexity represents the birth of proto-economic systems, where prestige items were exchanged, gifted, or inherited. These tools carried social meaning, status, role, perhaps even spiritual power. And while these artifacts are beautiful, they remain tools. They were made, used, worn, and buried, each bearing the marks of a living hand, a practiced eye, and a human life lived with intention. The Neolithic shift, tools for a new world. Around 12,000 years ago, the world changed. The last great ice age came to an end, glaciers retreated, and the planet began to warm. Forests spread where tundra once lay, and vast plains turned into fertile valleys. With this ecological transformation came the Neolithic Revolution, a profound shift in how humans lived, worked, and used tools. In the Fertile Crescent, the Yangtze Valley, and Mesoamerica, early societies began to cultivate plants, domesticate animals, and build permanent dwellings. And with these changes, the tools of hunter-gatherers evolved into the tools of farmers. People now needed implements no longer roaming the land. Enter the era of polished stone tools, blades honed not just by flaking, but by grinding, sanding, and polishing on hard stone surfaces. This produced edges far sharper and more durable than flint flakes. The polished stone axe was among the most iconic of Neolithic tools. Its symmetrical head, often with a hafted wooden handle, was used to clear forests, build homes, and cut timber. These axes were so valuable that some were buried with their owner's symbols, not just of labor, but of identity and wealth. Grinding, harvesting, and the rise of the food economy. With agriculture came the need to process grain and other plant foods. Grinding stones, heavy flat stones paired with handheld querns or pestles became staples of Neolithic households. These tools were used to crush wheat, barley, millet, and maize into flour. This act of grinding grain was repetitive, labor-intensive, and deeply ingrained in daily life, especially among women, who were often the primary food processors. Archaeological studies of female skeletons from Neolithic sites show enlarged forearm bones and joint wear. Consistent with years of this physical motion, tools were shaping the body as much as the land. Alongside these emerged sickles, curved cutting blades often made of stone, bone, or even early metal. Fitted with sharp microliths, they allowed people to harvest crops quickly and efficiently. These composite tools helped support larger populations and surplus food storage, a critical condition for social complexity, hierarchy, and settlement building. Tools of transformation, clay, fire, and metallurgy. As Neolithic communities grew, so too did their need for storage, cooking, and crafting. Tools were no longer just for hunting or harvesting, they now shaped culture. One of the most groundbreaking innovations of this period was the use of clay. Early humans began forming pots, bowls, and jars, then firing them in kilns or open pits. These ceramic vessels allowed for long-term food storage, cooking over flame, and even transportation of grain, oil, and water. The shaping of clay was a tool in itself, requiring deft fingers, turning platforms, and firing knowledge. Pottery wasn't just functional. It was decorative, symbolic, and even ritualistic. Many early cultures inscribed designs, painted surfaces, and shaped vessels into symbolic forms. Meanwhile, deep beneath the ground, early miners were extracting a different resource, metal ore. By the late Neolithic, in areas such as the Balkans and Anatolia, humans discovered how to smelt copper-producing soft, gleaming tools and ornaments. The first metallurgy was born. These early copper tools weren't yet stronger than stone, but they were malleable, recyclable, and visually striking. They carried symbolic weight used in rituals, graves, and status displays. Tools, once made solely for survival, were now intertwined with social identity, craft specialization, and trade. Tools across continents, diversity, and innovation. As human populations spread across continents, the toolkits they carried were not uniform. Instead, they diversified, shaped by geography, climate, available materials, and cultural choices. While stone, bone, and wood remained universal, the forms and uses of tools varied widely. In sub-Saharan Africa, microlith traditions flourished alongside woodworking and intricate beadwork. Here, tools were often multifunctional, adapted for hunting, fishing, digging tubers, or processing hides. Ostrich eggshells were carved into containers, and symbolic engravings appeared on tools and ornaments alike. In East and Southeast Asia, a different trajectory emerged. Here, early agricultural communities developed specialized rice harvesting blades, sickle teeth, and complex jade and stone ceremonial axes. Some of these tools served both ritual and practical functions. In places like China and Korea, polished stone tools reached exquisite refinement, more artwork than implement. In Australia, where Aboriginal peoples maintained a foraging lifestyle for over 60,000 years, stone tool technologies like the backed blade became staples. These small, sharp-edged flakes were hafted into spears or cutting handles. But perhaps more striking were the tools made of plant fibers, wood, and resin, such as the iconic boomerang, both hunting tool and cultural emblem. In the Americas, Clovis points and later projectile technologies reveal a deep understanding of hunting megafauna. In South America, early communities used bone and obsidian to produce sophisticated fishing and butchering tools. As maize cultivation developed in Mesoamerica, tools like manos and metates, large grinding stones, became central to daily life. Each region created a toolkit adapted to its ecological niche, a reflection of both necessity and creativity. Tools were not static, they were cultural signatures. Migration, contact, and the spread of ideas. As early humans migrated, they didn't just bring genes, they brought technologies. The Acheulean hand axe, for instance, has been found from East Africa to Western Europe, and even as far east as India. Its presence speaks to a transmission of knowledge across generations and landscapes. Trade networks also played a role. Long-distance exchange of obsidian, shells, and copper suggests that not only raw materials but also ideas moved between groups. A particular flaking technique or tool form might appear hundreds of miles from its origin. One of the most intriguing examples comes from Lapita culture in the Pacific. Between 1600 and 500 BCE, Lapita seafarers used adze tools made from volcanic rock to carve canoes, build shelters, and navigate across thousands of miles of ocean. Their distinctive pottery and tools have been found from Melanesia to Polynesia, revealing a remarkable capacity for both technological adaptation and social memory. In the northern tundras of Eurasia, reindeer herding cultures crafted knives from antler and ivory, snowshoes, bone sled runners, and toggling harpoons for seal hunting. Across the Arctic, the Inuit later developed tools like the ulu, a crescent-shaped knife used for food prep, hide processing, and even childbirth. These tools reflect the incredible breadth of human ingenuity, an evolving, branching tree rooted in the same fundamental need to master the environment through invention. From use to meaning, tools as storytellers. By now, tools had become more than just extensions of the body, they were carriers of meaning. A decorated axe might represent status. A finely made blade might be a bride gift. A fluted spearhead might show identity or ancestral lineage. Tools became vessels of memory. In some cultures, weapons were passed down from generation to generation, their blades bearing the wear of hunts, battles, or rituals. In others, tools were buried with the dead, signaling that their utility and meaning extended beyond life. Artisans emerged. Toolmakers were no longer simply skilled workers, they were guardians of knowledge, respected for their precision, patience, and innovation. The stoneworker, the bone carver, the potter all held critical roles in the preservation and progression of culture. Fire as a tool, mastering the element. Long before furnaces and forges, humans wielded one of nature's greatest forces, fire. Initially feared and avoided, fire eventually became our first engine of transformation. It provided warmth, safety, cooked food, and in time, shaped the very tools we carried. By around 1.5 million years ago, there's evidence that Homo erectus had learned to control fire. But by the Upper Paleolithic, fire was no longer just a tool of survival. It was an instrument of craftsmanship. And nowhere is this clearer than in the evolution of tools. Fire allowed early humans to harden wooden spear tips, making them more durable. It was used to shape bone and antler, to soften sinew, and even to melt resin for glue. Fire was also the key to birch pitch and adhesive used for hafting stone points, requiring oxygen-controlled burns. This was a chemical process, and those who mastered it had an advantage. But the greatest leap fire brought was the transition from shaping tools to transforming raw material itself. Kilns, pottery, and the art of containment. The Neolithic period saw one of the most profound uses of fire in tool-making, pottery. Early ceramic vessels weren't just accidental sun-dried containers. They were deliberately shaped and fired in pits or rudimentary kilns. Pottery changed everything. Now, food could be stored, boiled, and transported. Grains stayed dry. Stews could be cooked slowly. Liquids could be fermented. These vessels weren't just functional, they were cultural canvases, often painted, engraved, or modeled into human or animal shapes. Across the world, different forms emerged. The deep, conical pots of the Jomon in Japan, the black burnished ware of early Europe, the intricately stamped bowls of the Americas. Pottery became both a tool and a storyteller, recording patterns, symbols, and mythologies in clay. The kiln itself became a tool, a controlled fire environment capable of reaching higher temperatures. Its invention paved the way for one of humanity's most transformative technologies, metallurgy. The first metals, copper and gold. At some point, perhaps by accident, early potters placed a rock containing copper into a fire hot enough to melt it. What emerged was not stone, but metal, shiny, soft, malleable. Unlike stone, it could be hammered, reshaped, melted again. This moment marked the beginning of the Chalcolithic or Copper Age. The first metal tools were rare and likely ceremonial. Beads, awls, and small axes crafted from native copper or meteoric iron were valued more for their beauty than strength. Stone was still sharper, and for many centuries it remained the primary tool-making material. But the implications of metal were profound. Early metallurgy required more than fire. It required knowledge, how to extract or control furnace heat and cast objects in stone molds. In places like the Balkans, Anatolia, and Mesopotamia, these techniques rapidly advanced. Then came gold, not for utility, but for status. Soft, lustrous, and incorruptible, gold was shaped into rings, pendants, and grave offerings. It too had to be worked with fire, annealed, beaten, polished. With gold and copper, humans were no longer just shaping tools, they were refining the earth. Tools to shape tools, the feedback loop of innovation. With fire and metal, the possibilities multiplied. Metal tools made better woodworking tools. With metal chisels, humans could carve mortises, tenons, and notched joints. With metal awls, they could pierce thick hides. With metal blades, they could shave surfaces smooth. This sparked a feedback loop. Better tools created better infrastructure, which enabled new innovations. In mining villages, tools were used to make shelters, furnaces, and even industrial zones. In coastal societies, sharper blades enabled more advanced boats, dugout canoes, sewn plank vessels, sails. In mountain communities, stronger axes carved terraces and irrigation channels. Humanity had crossed a threshold. No longer bound to what nature provided, we now created tools that could manipulate nature itself, extracting stone, channeling water, clearing forests, reshaping entire landscapes. And always, the fire burned, at the heart of workshops, forges, and kitchens. Controlled flame had become an extension of the human will. Monumental tools, the architecture of ambition. With the dawn of the Neolithic and the widespread adoption of agriculture, humans were no longer living in small bands. Settlements grew into villages. Villages grew into towns. And with scale came the need for tools that could build at scale. For the first time, tools weren't just personal, they were communal. Giant stone axes cleared forests for fields. Massive querns ground grain for entire communities. Tools now shaped not only daily life, but the structures that housed it. In places like Cataluyuk and Anatolia, Neolithic people used flint scrapers, antler picks, and stone chisels to cut timber, plaster walls, and carve storage bins. Elsewhere, clay bricks were shaped in molds, sun-dried, and stacked into homes. These bricks were tools in themselves, modular elements of architecture. As communities grew, so did ambition. Walls were built, defensive ditches dug, religious sites constructed. At Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey, possibly the world's oldest known temple, massive stone pillars over 16 tons each were quarried, carved, and arranged in ritual circles. Long before metal or the wheel, this was achieved with stone chisels, hammerstones, and rope, a staggering feat of coordination and labor. Megaliths, hammers, and engineering genius. Across Europe, Asia, and Africa, other great monuments arose. The megalithic cultures of Western Europe left behind dolmens, henges, passage tombs, and standing stones. Many weighed tens of tons. Yet Neolithic societies transported and aligned them, sometimes across miles, with astonishing precision. How? With levers, sledges, rollers, and an intimate understanding of force and friction. Large antler picks dug the quarry pits. Wooden rollers moved the stones. Rope made from twisted flax or sinew hauled them. Hammerstones pecked, carved, and shaped every surface. In Egypt, stone pounders were used to quarry granite for obelisks. In Mesopotamia, clay and bitumen formed arches and domes. In the Andes, stone tools carved precisely fitted walls like those of Sacsayhuaman without mortar. These were not hunter-gatherers with simple kits. These were tool-using engineers, transforming their environments and leaving legacies we still marvel at today. Tools of measurement, mapping, and memory. As construction grew more complex, so did the need for precision. Measurement became a new form of tool. Early plumb bobs, levels, and measuring rods helped align structures. Ropes were knotted at regular intervals to mark length. Shadow casting gnomons measured time and seasonal shifts. The sky became a compass. The sun and stars guided layout. Astronomical alignments at sites like Stonehenge and Nabta Playa hint at this growing mastery of abstract tools ideas made tangible through instruments. But measurement wasn't limited to buildings. It applied to land, harvests, and trade. Clay tokens precursors to writing recorded grain, sheep, and jars of oil. These too were tools of accounting, memory, and eventually governance. And alongside them, oral traditions developed spoken instructions for tool use, construction, ritual. These oral tools shaped collective knowledge, passed down not through stone, but through story. When tools become symbols, as tools became more sophisticated, so did their symbolic power. A farmer's sickle might represent abundance, a smith's hammer divine power, a king's staff authority. Tools began to appear on seals, murals, and ornaments. They were carved into statues, worn as amulets, buried in graves. They weren't just things, they were icons. In some cultures, tools were attributed to gods or spirits. The forge belonged to Hephaestus or Ogun, the hammer to Thor, the axe to Perun. Across the ancient world, myth and metallurgy intertwined. Even burial practices changed. Neolithic graves began to include toolkits, flint knives, bone awls, polished adzes, each a reflection of the person's role in life. Hunters buried with arrows, farmers with grinding stones, artisans with chisels. Tools had become identity. The weaponized mind, tools of war and defense. As human societies grew more complex, competition followed. Over land, water, livestock, or resources conflict emerged. And with it, the transformation of tools into weapons of war. From the very beginning, some tools were designed to harm. The earliest projectile points sharpened flint flakes. Obsidian blades were used not only to hunt animals but to wound or kill other humans. Archaeological sites in Africa and Europe contain skeletons with embedded points, skull fractures, and parry wounds. Conflict, it seems, is as old as community. With the rise of farming and permanent settlements, the stakes grew higher. People now had territory, harvests, and boundaries. Weapons evolved in response. Bows and arrows appeared, offering range and stealth. Daggers and maces, once tools, were now shaped exclusively for combat. In the Near East, slingshots made from plant fiber and leather could hurl stones with deadly force. In the Americas, the atla, the spear thrower, gave increased velocity to long darts. In Europe and Central Asia, battle axes began to appear, often made of polished stone, then bronze. These weapons weren't only functional. They were ceremonial, carved, inlaid, decorated. Some were buried with leaders, others offered to gods. Warfare was now ritualized, and weapons had become symbols of power. Fortification, strategy, and the engineering of control. As conflict escalated, tools were repurposed not only for attack but for defense. Communities erected walls, dug ditches, and built watchtowers. These too required tools, spades, picks, chisels, and lifting levers. The labor was immense, but so were the rewards. In Mesopotamia, entire cities were surrounded by monumental walls. In the Andes, tiered terraces and restricted pathways made invasion difficult. In Europe, hill forts were built on elevated ground fortified with wood palisades and earthworks. The toolkit now included siege tools, battering rams, fire-starting resin, ladders, and defensive countermeasures like boiling oil or slings. Engineers emerged as a new class, part builder, part tactician. But it wasn't just about brute force. Strategic planning became a tool. Ambush, blockades, psychological tactics, they required coordination, timing, and innovation. War, terrible as it was, drove human ingenuity forward, fueling metallurgy, construction, and mass production. The same bronze used to cast swords was also used for plowshares. The duality of tools creation and destruction was now fully manifest. The sword and the smith, sacred craftsman. In nearly every early civilization, the smith held a position of both fear and reverence. To control fire, to melt metal, to shape form from ore, this bordered on magic. Blacksmiths were often seen as mediators between worlds, earth and spirit, raw and refined. The tools they forged were not mere objects. They were artifacts of transformation. Blades, sickles, chisels, rings, they bore both function and myth. In Bronze Age Europe, hordes of weapons were buried or thrown into lakes, offerings to gods or ancestors. In Iron Age Africa, ceremonial iron staffs represented political and spiritual authority. In Asia, the katana was forged with ritual, folded steel, and spiritual meaning. Across cultures, tools and weapons alike became sacred objects used to swear oaths, seal treaties, or crown rulers. And the forge, once just a hearth, became a site of creation, where earth was reborn as edge, and edge became power. When tools shaped society, as toolkits diversified, so too did the people who used them. By the end of the Bronze Age, human societies were no longer just groups of generalists. They were specialized economies of farmers, weavers, masons, scribes, warriors, and priests. Tools defined roles. The chisel marked the mason. The needle marked the seamstress. The bow marked the hunter. The quill marked the scribe. Your toolkit became your trade, your place in the world. Workshops grew. Trade expanded. Toolmakers began crafting not only for survival but for commerce. Innovation accelerated. From simple beginnings, tools had now become engines of social identity, economic growth, and political order. From flint to steel, echoes of the ancient. The Bronze Age gave way to the Iron Age. Stronger, more durable, and more abundant, iron replaced stone and copper in most societies. With it, tools became sharper, plows dug deeper, buildings reached higher. Iron fueled empires, equipped legions, and tilled the fields that fed millions. Yet the essence remained unchanged. A chisel still carved. A hammer still struck. A knife still cut. The materials evolved, but the intention stayed the same: to create, to provide, to defend, to survive. And remarkably, the ancient tool forms never vanished. Flint blades gave way to steel scalpels. Bone needles became stainless steel ones. The obsidian scraper lives on in the surgeon's ultra-sharp scalpel. The quern and mortar found new life in modern mills and kitchens. The stone axe became the chainsaw. The bow became the rifle. But their DNA, design, purpose, force remains embedded in each new invention. The digital toolmaker. In the last 100 years, tools have changed faster than in the previous 100,000. We now wield instruments of information, computation, and manipulation of the atomic world. The modern hunter gathers data. The artisan codes in binary. The builder uses laser levels and GPS satellites. And yet, every innovation still begins with a human need, a material, and an idea. From stone flake to silicon chip, the core process is unchanged. Design, test, refine, repeat. Even the digital tools we use, laptops, drones, CNC machines, trace their heritage to hammers, knives, and scribes. The mouse is a descendant of the flint core. The keyboard echoes the chisel. The circuit board, like a carefully constructed microlith, is a composite of materials layered and aligned for precision. Tools are now abstract, invisible software, algorithms, neural networks. But each still does what those first flakes did: extend our minds and hands. Tools as destiny, a human story. From the first rock struck in Olduvai Gorge to the satellites we launch into space, tools have carried humanity across landscapes, epochs, and revolutions. They fed us, clothed us, protected us, and given us the means to dream, build, destroy, and rebuild. They formed the boundaries of empires, shaped the symbols of religions, and left behind the fingerprints of ancestors whose names we will never know. To study tools is to study who we are. Not only because they show what we made, but because they show what mattered: survival, collaboration, curiosity, and meaning. In a single flint blade lies design, foresight, tradition, utility, and sometimes beauty. In a polished axe lies the sweat of the forest and the story of settlement. In a bone needle lies love, the kind that keeps families warm in winter. And in every tool we make, from stone to silicon, we embed a part of ourselves. Epilogue: the toolmaker endures. We are still toolmakers, still designers, still builders. The form has changed, but the impulse remains. Our ancestors didn't just survive because they were strong or fast. They survived because they could shape the world around them. And so do we. As we move forward into digital landscapes, genetic editing, artificial intelligence, and interplanetary engineering, our most ancient identity endures. The maker, the shaper, the one who sees not just what is, but what could be. The tool, in the end, is not what we hold in our hands. It is what we dare to imagine. And that, above all else, is what makes us human.